We've got breaking news to get to this hour. The Sun Prairie Area School District now faces a civil rights complaint following that incident in March involving an 18-year-old biological male identifying as a transgender woman who reportedly exposed his genitals to 4 freshman girls in a high school shower. The Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty filed the sex discrimination complaint Wednesday with the U.S. Department of Education Office of Civil Rights. Dan Lennington, Will's deputy counsel, now joins us to talk about that complaint and what it means both here in the state of Wisconsin and nationally. Good morning, sir. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
I appreciate it. I guess let's get into the complaint itself. This is something that came up in early March. Concerned parents brought this matter to your attention. This has been a long process. I suppose the place to begin is at the beginning. How did all of this come up, and where are we today?
Well, it all came up because the Sun Prairie Area School District, just outside of Madison, there had a policy that allowed transgender students to basically use whatever locker room they wanted to use. And that was their policy, and they were apparently pretty proud of that, because what happened is that a student who was an adult male exposed himself in the shower to 4 freshman girls and told them, "I'm trans, by the way." And the school district, in response to learning of this, did pretty much nothing. They didn't investigate. They didn't interview the girls involved. They didn't offer supportive measures. They didn't contact parents, but just sort of let it simmer. And then we found out about it through the parents. We represent some of the parents involved in this, and contacted the school district and said, "Look, this is totally inadequate. Title IX of the Civil Rights Act protects kids in schools from sexual harassment. Sex discrimination, and when you have a male exposing his genitals to 4 freshman girls, that I think everybody would say that's sexual harassment." And so
that makes sense. Yeah, that would make sense. That would make sense, Dan, in the world that existed up until about 5 years ago, it seems. But apparently, common sense does not exist in some of these schools anymore. So I'm sorry to interrupt, but then you're trying to get some answers, and not only are they standoffish about it based on the record that I have seen, then they go about charging the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty something like $11,000 to get the documents related to all of this.
Yeah, they totally stonewalled, said that we'd have to pay $11,000 if we wanted to know anything. It was all about, this is no big deal, nothing to worry about here. What they say now is they say, well, we don't condone one student being in a state of undress in the presence of a student of the opposite sex. Now, what they're trying to say is that boys should not be naked in front of girls. They can't really say that because they have all these phrases like gender and sex assigned at birth that muddle up what they really mean. But they are very clear now that their policy actually, as of today, is that a transgender person can go in any locker room they want to go into. Except the district says, but you can't be naked in a locker room of a gender different than what you were assigned at birth. Now, what that means apparently is that if you're transgender, you can go into the opposite sex locker room. You just have to apparently just stand there and just not undress. But, the whole point of a locker room, it's been a few years since I was in high school sports, but I think that the point of a locker room remains the same, is that it is a dressing room, essentially. It is a place where you change clothes.
Yes.
And so the idea that transgender kids can be in the opposite sex locker room, but they can't change, kind of undermines the whole idea, and it just shows how ridiculous Sun Prairie's policy is. It's not a real policy. They're just attempting to kowtow to the gender ideology that pervades all of our schools, and they can't actually enforce sex-based locker rooms because that would offend that would offend their ideology.
Have they changed the terminology for locker room, and what sort of pronoun does locker room have these days, according to the gender ideology left? The Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty has filed the sex discrimination complaint against the U.S. or against the Sun Prairie Area School District with the U.S. Department of Education Office of Civil Rights. You can find the story, by the way, this morning at the Wisconsin Daily Star, wisconsindailystar.com. I believe it is also breaking on Fox News at this hour. But Dan, where is all of this going? I reached out to the school district. I've reached out to the school district several times. They've issued limited statements. They talk about how, well, the privacy of the students will, pretty much prevent us from commenting further. Isn't that an interesting explanation when privacy was so violated in this case, according to the record? What happens from here?
Yeah, well, I mean, they don't want to tell us anything. They don't want to tell the parents anything. They keep saying privacy, privacy. Well, now they're going to have to tell the U.S. Department of Education Office of Civil Rights what's going on. The Office of Civil Rights is charged by federal law to investigate sex discrimination and sexual harassment that occurs in public schools. They actually have a pretty robust investigatory staff, and we are asking the department to send investigators to Sun Prairie and start asking difficult questions. Now, this comes on the heels of a letter from the U.S. Committee on Workforce in the U.S. Congress, Congressman Virginia Fox and Mary Miller from North Carolina and Illinois. They called on the Department of Education last week to start a Title IX investigation. And so we are also saying that we're asking for an investigation. We are filing a formal complaint, and that triggers the Biden administration to start an investigation. Now, we think it's important for the Biden administration because all of this confusion which is pervading our public schools, has come from the Biden administration, which has muddied up the waters on what is a girl and what is a boy. And so without that muddiness in the water, we wouldn't have these problems. And so they made the mess, and we think the Biden administration should clean up its own mess.
It's an interesting point. Dan Lennington, Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty's deputy counsel, involved in this particular case. I think that our listeners are asking the same question as you broach the topic, and that is, how do you expect to get justice for these 4 freshman girls when it is this administration that has created the mess, as you say, this administration that has pushed the gender ideology agenda, the transgender agenda so far? And we heard, frankly, this week on Capitol Hill from the transgender Secretary of Health and Human Services talking about doubling down on these things. How do you expect justice out of this administration?
Well, I think eventually it's going to be the voters are going to have a say in this. And we saw some very interesting polling last week about transgenderism in sports. And majorities of Democrats and Republicans and independents all think that it's frankly ridiculous to allow boys to participate in girls' sports. And so we'll be able to hear from the voters next year, and hopefully our policymakers and the bureaucrats who run our agencies get a wake-up call and learn that most Americans, the vast majority of Americans, don't believe that boys should be in girls' showers and don't believe that boys should be out there playing, basketball and soccer and lacrosse with high school girls. That, I think that's just common sense. And we have Title IX, specifically was implemented to protect girls' sports and opportunities for girls. It's exceedingly important that kids, boys and girls, have access to sports and athletics and all the values that they learn from those things in high school, and to basically throw that out because a few activists want to change the definition of boy and girl is ridiculous. It's unsafe, and it's not the type of country or educational system that we want to have.
Just have a couple moments left. Let's switch gears to another story. We broke this yesterday on the Dan O'Donnell Show. You'll find this story as well at the Wisconsin Daily Star. This is something that the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty got wind of a while back. The Baraboo School District held focus groups as part of a, quote, racism as a public health issue initiative that was exclusively for Black, Indigenous, and people of color middle schoolers, offering the minority students in attendance a $100 gift card plus a pizza party. When I reached out to the school district superintendent didn't have anything to say on this. He has not denied the allegations, and the records and emails suggest as much. What do you say about all of this?
Yeah, we heard from parents this rumor that there was some sort of a pizza party being held for kids who were not white, and that white kids were excluded from this pizza party. And we asked for records from the district, and lo and behold, it turned out that they actually gave $100 Visa gift cards, and had a pizza party for students to talk about racism in middle school. But kids who were white were excluded from the party because they were white. And that is race discrimination. Race discrimination is unconstitutional. It is illegal under federal law. And the records reveal that the school district thinks this is really not a big deal. And I fear that this, and we do know that this is going on, other types of race discrimination throughout Wisconsin public schools, that teachers and administrators, in the name of equity, believe that race discrimination against white kids and Asian kids is just no big deal. And we need to make sure that everybody ends up in the same place, as Vice President Kamala Harris says. And to do that, we need to do a little bit of discriminating here and there. But that is not appropriate. It is not legal. It's immoral. And we're going to be, watching this and making sure that schools comply with federal law. And parents that see evidence of race discrimination in schools can feel free to go to our website and ask to talk to a lawyer, and we'd be happy to talk with you.
In the parlance of the equity left, this is systemically stupid. It's racist, no matter how you slice it. And you can't fight racism and discrimination with racism and discrimination. This has just got to stop. That's why the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty is there. And quite frankly, Dan, that's why you folks are so busy these days, I'm afraid. Well, thank you so much for shedding some light on these two very important stories. We'll continue to follow up. Good luck to you moving forward.
All right. Thanks a lot, Matt.
You bet. Dan Lennington, Deputy Counsel for the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty.